Hey, and welcome back. I've been able to document and share some of the unique experiences I have as a performing musician, and especially in my capacity as a freelance drummer, I get a lot of unique calls to play for different groups. Tonight, I have another one of those opportunities, and it started a couple months ago when I got an email saying that I was referred by another drummer out of Milwaukee to be a part of this touring Broadway Cabaret show. This group has 3 singers who I believe were on Broadway or Broadway tours at some point, and they do a variety of different Broadway and musical music with a backing band that varies between, I think, 3 to 8 or 9 people. This show they're doing is at a theater about an hour and a half away from where I live, and in addition to asking me to play drums, they also asked me if I could recommend some of the horn players and rhythm section players to hire out to fill out the band for this. This is actually pretty common that these sorts of shows tour with just an MD, musical director. Oftentimes this is a piano player. Sometimes they tour with an entire rhythm section, but it's pretty standard affair to hire out all of the horns locally and sometimes a good portion of the rhythm section. I don't get called for too many of these specific style gigs, and the Broadway theater world is something that I really enjoy, but I just don't really get to be a part of. There's plenty of paid theater work in my area, a lot of times with high schools or community theater groups. But to be honest, a lot of those shows might pay like $500 to $800 for an entire run, which sounds like a pretty good payday, but you have to factor in that is at least one whole weekend of shows, and usually a full tech week of rehearsals leading up to those shows. I teach private lessons during the week, and those typically happen after school through the early evening when these tech rehearsals would be going on. So even if I wasn't booked with gigs for that weekend of a theater show, for me to sacrifice all of the lesson income for a week and then any potential gigs I have on the weekend, it usually doesn't make fiscal sense for me to be part of these shows. This one is a little different because it's not an entire stage production. It's a cabaret event, so these singers will be at the front of the stage, the band will be on stage. There just won't be the same level of props and staging and production to the entire thing. It's a one-day commitment, so we'll be going in today around 3 or 3:45 to load in, set up, do a run-through of the show, have a break for dinner, and then do this 2-hour concert and be done. Like I was saying, since I don't get to play a bunch of theater shows, a lot of this music is not as familiar to me. Plenty of it is because, of course, I've heard a lot of these old Broadway standards that also cross over into the jazz world. But for some of the other things like Dear Evan Hansen, Wicked, Newsies, or any of the other shows that I don't even know where this stuff comes from, I really had to do some digging and practice to prepare. They did a really good job at providing me charts, practice recordings, and a pretty well simulated experience of what this show's going to be like. We are playing to backing tracks, and with a click track, which I personally love, because this means there's going to be no variance from how I practice to how it goes on stage as far as the tempo and timing of everything. It can be really challenging as a drummer when I get called to sub to keep things locked into an exact tempo where singers feel comfortable, especially if there's any choreography involved where things need to be very specific in order for them to feel comfortable. We'll have in-ear monitors, and the only thing that will be in there is the click track, the guide track just telling us where different sections are approaching or tempo changes, and then some of the supplementary instruments that are filling out the sound of the band. We'll have to rely on stage monitors and just acoustic sound of all the other instruments to be able to kind of hear the whole mix. I'm planning on bringing both my sets of in-ear monitors. I have a set of custom molded ones, but those provide a lot of isolation, so this setting might not be the best for those, since I want some of the room sound to bleed into what I'm hearing. On top of that, they're backlining a drum set for this show. I honestly think part of that is because when they're working with the venue, it probably makes it feel more national and not like, oh, we're coming in and just using local musicians if they have to provide all those instruments. I may be wrong, but that's just kind of the impression I get when I see them using that, because I'd personally rather play on my own drum set. I'd be more comfortable, and I don't know what I'm using going into it. They weren't really able to provide me a technical rider of what the venue is providing in terms of what size drums, how many pieces, are there cymbals there, what are they? So I'm going to bring a few pieces of my own. I'm not planning on bringing any of that into the venue until I know I need it, because if the cymbals in there are fine, I'm just going to use them. I think that's a nice sign of respect for the person who had to haul all that equipment in there for me. When I was working on the music, there's a few accessory pieces, like a couple triangle hits, some wind chime. I don't know what you call wind chime. Not a swell, that would be a cymbal roll, but a wind chime effect. I went ahead and bought a new triangle because I had an old triangle, but it was junk, and I didn't have a beater or a clip, so I bought one from Steve Weiss Music. They sell some pretty cheap percussion equipment, and it actually sounds pretty nice. I also borrowed a set of wind chimes from my friend Lucas, who plays percussion with my band The Pocket Kings, and we play together in a salsa group. He brought these to a gig a few weeks ago, and I love these because they have a little damper bar on the back, so if you're moving them around or you bump into it, it's not going to make a sound. And if you've been a high school percussionist who's had to move the wind chimes from the band room to the stage, you know how challenging it is to even move wind chimes like an inch without them making a ton of noise. I need to bring some mallets in addition to sticks and brushes, so I want to have some sort of trap table set up, and I built a trap table for this gig, but I think I might just bring a towel and find a chair that I can use, or maybe a drum case from this rented drum set if there's one there. That might be a better option and a little easier in terms of less to maneuver in and out. I've spent the last week working on this music, and it was hard, man. I do plenty of reading sheet music in a variety of settings, but this sort of musical theater notation in terms of the drum set is pretty unique compared to like jazz big band charts. There's a lot more things written out here very specifically, and it's not like you have slash notation and hits above. I'm not too well versed in this world, so I tried to do some listening to recordings I found on YouTube of this group specifically playing these songs, just to get a feel for where do I need to play exactly what's on the page and where do I have room to add some fill or set up some hits. I'm sure I'm going to be figuring that out a little bit during the rehearsal, and my goal is to just make them feel comfortable, and if they say nothing, that means I did a really good job. I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to film because I just don't have a familiarity with this group, and I don't want to be a nuisance trying to have my camera and vlog this whole experience. But I'll see if I can at least get some footage from the setup, the equipment, rehearsal, and maybe even the show. I needed to pack a few out-of-the-ordinary pieces for this gig, but I've also been meaning to swap out these snare heads for a while on my gigging drum, so I made some time to do that quickly as well. I love the sound and feel of well-worn-in heads and hate changing them out. It really comes down to struggling to keep it in tune for long periods of time, and seeing the bottom head stretched out a bit too far from its extended life. I also tend to use the same cymbals gig to gig, and they definitely feel like my sound, but in this setting, I wanted to use a few different cymbals to find a sound better fit for this music I was playing. After picking and swapping out cymbals, I packed up my triangle and wind chimes, and then went upstairs to pack up the car. On top of bringing my own snare, cymbals, and percussion, I also packed my hardware bag just in case I'd want my own throne or kick pedal after seeing the backline rig. And finally, before taking off, I also needed to pack some all-black clothing options as well. I hit the road a little after 1:30 so that I could swing by and grab my friend Kelvin, who was playing guitar on this show. The drive out to Wisconsin Rapids is about 90 minutes, and we both wanted to be there a bit before the 3:45 call so that we could get a chance to check out our different backline setups and get comfortable before the rehearsal and sound check. We pulled up to the theater around 3:15, and after getting a lay of the land, we loaded in. For me, this was just my cymbals, percussion, and clothing until I could get a sense of what other equipment I might need to pull out from my car. We couldn't get on the stage quite yet because the singers were doing an outreach program with some high school students, but once 3:45 hit, we were able to get up there and check out our backline equipment for the night. I was really pleased to see a Yamaha Maple Custom kit, Superphonic snare, and DW hardware for me to use, so I was sure I could get by with just bringing in my own cymbals and percussion. I spent maybe 10 minutes dialing in my setup, tuning up the drums, meeting our singers and the musical director, and then we quickly got into a sound check and running down the entire show. Having this entire show be done with click and tracks was so relaxing in terms of having my practice be the same exact experience as performing with the group, but I do have to say having the vocals now added in on top certainly changed my viewpoint on some of the arrangements and orchestrations. I also quickly learned that since the singers don't have the click or guide tracks, the drum lead-ins and cues were critical in terms of setting up transitions and entrances for them. Over the next 90 minutes, we ran down the entire show, most of it just a single playthrough with the attitude of, if you missed something, you'll get it right in the show. After rehearsal, we had about 90 minutes to kill before showtime. We had a catered meal in the green room, and it was a good chance to hang out with some of my friends also playing on this show. I don't have too many clips of the actual performance, and the audio certainly doesn't meet my usual threshold for my content, but I'll drop in a few clips now so you can get a sense of what this show was like. I really enjoyed the change in playing with all the dramatic swells, sudden style and tempo changes, along with the variety of Broadway musicals this show covered. So it's been a few days since that gig, and looking back and reflecting on it, I think it went really well, although I will say it felt very corporate. Everything felt like it was being done at drive-through speed, and there wasn't a lot of personal connection involved and getting to know people. It was very much on a schedule and about efficiency, and right when the set ended, I got a Venmo from the production office, packed up, went home, and I may never hear from these people again. There's nothing wrong with that, and with the frequency that this group tours and travels and works with different musicians, it's hard to expect anything deeper, but it was an interesting look into a world that I don't play in as frequently as I do with my friends and close collaborators that I work with all the time. After getting a chance to go through the soundtrack, rehearsal, and talking to some of my fellow hired gun musicians, I definitely feel like I put in more time preparing this show. And that's not to say that they did a bad job, because they're all amazing musicians who probably could have pulled this off sight reading if they need to. But I wanted to put my best foot forward, and I wanted the musical director or the singers to remember how easy it was to work with me and hopefully work with me again. After the show, the MD did come up to me and thanked me for the work I put in, and he definitely noticed. And he shared with me how, in his experience of touring around and doing this, if you have a trumpet 2 player who misses a bunch of things or entrances, you can get by, and they have backing tracks to help supplement that. When it comes to the drummer, it really helps to have someone who knows what they're doing and has put the work in, and he really appreciated the work I put in. He also mentioned that he appreciated some of the extra things I did, like bringing the wind chimes and triangle, and thought it added to the show, not only musically, but for the audience who is watching us in a cabaret setting where they can't get distracted by props and as much dramatic choreography. I do want to correct one thing I said leading up to this show in regards to the backline and having that be a mirage for us all traveling in. I think that was much more about efficiency and a repeatable pattern that'll work city to city, because if I would have brought my own drums in, I would have had to be there a lot earlier before they did their educational program on stage so that I could have set up, sound checked, and worked with the production company. I think it's a lot easier for a backline company to come in the morning, set up equipment, live sound to come in during the afternoon, mic things up and get it roughed in, the singers to come in and do their educational program, and then the musicians to come in after that. I think that's much more what it was about, and it makes total sense to me now. My only critique of the process for that group would be in the practice tracks they sent me, I would have loved if it included the vocals so I could get a better sense of the orchestration. And it would have been nice if they had a version with the drums in there, because it took me through the sound check to really get comfortable with knowing when I need to play strictly what's on page and when I can improvise or play more what I think should be there based on original reference recordings or my own musical preference. If you're sitting here and wondering why I haven't shared the name of this group yet, that is intentional. These groups work hard to promote and sell their product to different touring circuits, and I'm not sure they would appreciate me sharing this behind-the-scenes look as a hired gun, so I'm not going to disclose their name, but just know that this is similar to plenty of touring shows that come through your town that supplement their ensemble with local musicians. I hope you enjoyed getting a chance to check out this interesting opportunity I had, and as always, I'm adding new videos to the channel, so make sure to subscribe, like this video, leave a comment, and I'll see you around soon. Thank you.